Last night we played audio of General Dwight D. Eisenhower's famous D-Day speech to the men who would storm the beaches of Normandy to repel Nazi-occupying forces. Now today, allow for me to read for you a short, simple statement that Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander and future president, wrote down, carefully folded, and stuck in his back pocket in case the invasion failed and he needed to issue a response to the public. Eisenhower planned to say, quote, "Our landings in the Cherbourg Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone," end quote. As you can see the strategy in his humility in order to save morale for his men, and so that he could downplay the sheer scale of such a failure to the enemy, reducing down Operation Overlord to merely landings in the Cherbourg Havre area. But Eisenhower is far from the only leader to have a backup speech prepared just in case things go awry. President Richard Nixon similarly had a memo typed up by Bill Sapphire, one of his speechwriters, titled simply, "In Event of Moon Disaster." It was dated to July 18, 1969, just 2 days before astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin successfully became the first humans to land on the moon, with Armstrong famously taking one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, you don't have to hear me read for you the prepared remarks Nixon would have read from in case the Apollo 11 mission had failed. And that's because a team from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology actually partnered with two AI companies, Canny AI and Respeecher, back in 2019 to create a deep fake of Nixon delivering the speech himself, almost 30 years after his death and about 50 years after the event in question. Take a look.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there's no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, to search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by their nation. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by a Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same, but our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied. But these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. Good night.
Amazing how realistic that looked. So not included in that deep fake is that before the speech, the memo directs Nixon to call the widows of the astronauts, and it also calls for a clergyman to be present when NASA officially ends communication with the doomed men, and for them to adopt the same procedure as for a burial at sea, commending the astronauts' souls to the deepest of the deep and concluding with the Lord's Prayer. But thankfully that ended up being unnecessary, as this story has a happy ending. The Richard Nixon Foundation has more on the most historic phone call ever placed from the White House.
On July 20th, 1969, President Nixon placed the longest long-distance phone call ever made, spanning the 240,000 miles from the Earth to the Moon. The official record described it as an interplanetary conversation, and another White House log noted that the call went to the Sea of Tranquility, the moon. I'm Dwight Chapin. I worked for President Nixon, and I was there on that historic night. I was 28 years old. It was a night I will never forget. I made some movies with my Super 8 movie camera. The atmosphere was electric, anticipatory. Despite all the activity around him, the president was focused, fascinated, waited for the call. You can see him watching the astronauts on the TV sets in front of his desk. Then Houston passed the word.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. That would be an honor.
AT&T had Apollo tracking stations all across the globe. The call went from the White House to the Goddard Space Center, to NASA in Houston, to a satellite over the Pacific, to a tracking station in Honeysuckle, Australia. Honeysuckle bounced it to the moon. It's estimated that 500 million people, 1 out of every 4 on Earth, were watching.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but and of peace of all nations.
And with that, I'm all out of time for tonight. Hopefully you learned something interesting to take with you into tomorrow. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Truth Social at Tipping Point OAN, or on my personal account, Nefertari_25. If you like the show, please send us feedback at tippingpoint@oann.com. And make sure to subscribe to OAN Live and to download the app for iOS, Android, Apple TV, and for other devices to watch Tipping Point wherever you go. And OAN Live features video on demand, so you never have to miss a show. So as always, thank you, and have a great night.